Video, I'm going to be teaching you guys about Unit 13, which is Coordination and Response Part 1. Now let's start with the video. Coordination is basically the way which receptors pick up stimuli and pass it on to an effector. Now, changes in an organism's environment are called stimuli. A singular form is stimulus. They are detected by specialized cells called receptors, and the organism responds to these changes using effectors, which are normally placed in muscles. And then most animals have two ways of sending this information, which is coordination: by the means of nerves and by the means of hormones. Now, I'm going to talk about firstly the human nervous system. It is made up of special cells called neurons. The neurons, they have the axon and the dendrites. They have the myelin sheaths, which insulates the neurons. Now here is a diagram of a human motor neuron, and you can see that it's just like any other cell. It has a nucleus, has a cell membrane, has a cell body, but it is specialized to do its job. By the way it is, I'm going to exit full screen here. You can see that this bit colored purple is the axon. Now, nerve impulses sent as electrical signals passes along here. And then these little claw-like structures that sticks out, they're called the dendrites. Now, their job is to connect to another neuron, so the information can be passed on from here. And the bit here, the other end of the axon, it could be nerve endings, which basically nerve endings. It's basically receptors, or it could be just other dendrites that connect to other neurons. Now, you can see that there is red rectangular bit that surrounds the axon. Now, these are the myelin sheath. Now, what it does is that it insulates the axon so that it can pass this information a lot faster. An insulated axon can pass signals up to 100 meters per second, whilst an axon that is not insulated can only pass impulses around 5 meters per second. I'm gonna turn back to full screen and carry on. Now, in the human body and all other animals' body, we have two different systems of coordination. They are the central and the peripheral nervous systems. Now, the central nervous system, also known as the CNS, I'm gonna use the CNS all the way through this PPT because it's just gonna be a short form, and I'm sure you guys all know what it is. Okay, so it is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. Now, the spinal cord is basically an extension of the brain that runs parallel to the spine, which is the backbone of the human body. And it ends about the end of the pelvis girdle, which is at the end of the core. The peripheral nervous system, the PNS, is made up of nerves and receptors. The job of the CNS is to coordinate messages or nerve impulses throughout both systems. Now, there's a spelling mistake there, just don't mind, because it still gives the information. So basically here is a picture of all the different neurons that are present in the body. You can see that here, the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. And you can see where the spinal cord ends. Now, the spinal cord ends somewhere around here. It's a bit shorter, this diagram, I don't know why, but it always ends somewhere around here. And also you can see the peripheral nervous system is made up of all the other little bits of yellow neurons together, and they also include receptors as well. Okay, let's move on. Now, I'm going to talk about now the different types of neurons. Now, there are three types of neurons. They're the sensory neurons, the relay neurons, and the motor neurons. So here's a picture of all the three. So basically the function of the sensory neuron is to pass information picked up as a stimulus by a receptor and sends this information to the spinal cord. So basically, its name suggests what it does, sensory. So basically it senses stimuli as well, and as well as passing it. Now, a relay neuron, its name suggests it relays information, or it receives information from another neuron and passes on to another neuron. So basically, these relay neurons are found in the spinal cord and the brain. So basically, what this job does is that it receives information from the sensory neuron and then passes it on to a motor neuron. And if this relay neuron is not in the brain, you'll also pass the information to the brain. Now, the motor neuron, as it suggests, is basically the neuron that always connects to an effector. So basically, the motor neuron receives the information from the relay neuron, and then it passes the information down to an effector, which is normally in your muscles, and then your muscles react accordingly. You can see that their shapes are like a little bit different to each other. Basically, the sensory neuron and the motor neuron have similar functions, but they look different. You need to remember that the cell body, which contains the nucleus, in the sensory neuron is in the middle part of the axon, right? And then, if the sensory neuron is really close to a nerve ending, then at one end it will be at one end the axon will extend into the receptor cell, and then at one end it will be these little dendrites around here that will pass the information out. Now, the relay neuron, normally they look like some sort of like a clustered ball shape with the cell body in the middle and then all the way expands out with little dendrites. Now, it also could look like this. Now, its shape basically tells us about its job. So basically, the impulse is sent all around, and then the cell sends it back out to the according neurons. Now, the motor neuron is looks like the one that I've just showed you in this slide here. The cell body, which it's at one end, and at that end it extends out to a lot of dendrites, and then this is the axon here, and then it will pass information down to the nerve ending in the effector in the muscles. Now, these motor neurons can have axons of a meter long. The way they do that is, if we have, like, for example, like non-neurons, the information can pass along more smoothly and more faster than if you have like a series of neurons joined together. Now I'm going to talk about reflex arcs. Now, the reflex arcs are basically actions that you don't need to think about. So it happens when your receptors pick up a stimulus, sends an impulse along a sensory neuron to the CNS, and then a relay neuron passes it to a motor neuron and also the brain. The motor neuron then finally passes it onto an effector, which is a lot of times your muscles, as I explained earlier. So basically, here is a reflex action. For example, if your hand touches a hot plate, right? The receptors in your hand picks up the stimulus. It then sends an impulse along the sensory neuron to the CNS. And in the CNS, this impulse is passed on to a relay neuron, which then passes on to a motor neuron, and then this information is carried back to the muscles in your forearm, and which quickly contracts and raises your hand away from the hot plate. Now, these actions do not need you to think about it. Your brain is made aware of it, but you only consciously realize what is happening after the message has been sent to your muscles and after your muscles have moved out. Now, these actions are really, really useful because the message gets from the receptor to the effector as quickly as possible. The pathway along the nerve impulse passes the sensory neuron, the relay neuron, the motor neuron is called a reflex arc. So basically, the path that the information picked up at the receptor and travels all the way back to an effector, that path is called a reflex arc. Reflex actions are examples of involuntary actions. They do not need conscious control. Another two examples are, for example, the knee-jerk reflex, as well as the iris reflex, which I will talk about them in the next part of the video, of the topic. Now, a lot of the actions that you do normally every day, for example, if you write, you read, you eat, you look at your phone, they are voluntary actions. They need you to decide whether to carry them out or not. Now, here's another example, very important process of coordination, which is synapses. Now, synapses is the gap between two neurons. Now, the gap is called the synaptic cleft. The synapse is the cleft plus the ends of the two neurons, which are opposite of each other. Now, impulses are passed through the cleft by neurotransmitters. Now, they are stored in vesicles in one of the ends of a neuron. The way that it's organized like this is to ensure that the nerve impulse only travels one direction only. And these act as a one-way valve. Now here's basically a synapse. Now the synapse works by, for example, I'm gonna actually full screen here. So the synapse works like this. So let's say an impulse is sent along here, and it moves to here. So when this neuron, or whatever the name it is, picks up information, it causes these vesicles to move towards the end, around here. Now, when the information gets here, it causes these vesicles to release these neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft. Now, these neurotransmitters diffuses across the cleft, and then it fits into the neurotransmitter receptors on the other end of the cleft, and which these receptors turn these signals into another impulse, and then sends this impulse along this neuron. Now, here's some very weird labels in this diagram. For example, like this voltage gated, whatever it is, you do not need to know them. So basically, you need to know that these vesicles are pushed towards the end when the impulse travels along this neuron. It then breaks open to release these neurotransmitters, which diffuses across the cleft and fits into the neurotransmitter receptors on the other end of the cleft, and then these receptors then turns it into another new electrical impulse, and then sends it along. Now I'm gonna end this video here because this is my first part of the video. I hope you learned something from it. The first part is not that hard. It's the synapses that requires you to understand how it works, but after you understand it, it's really, really easy to explain, and then you can almost always get full marks on an explanation question in this one. You need to know the difference between reflex actions and voluntary actions, as well as the 3 different types of a human neuron and then what it does. Okay, my next video is going to come out shortly after this. It's going to be about unit 13.3 all the way to the end of all the way to unit 13.5. And I'll see you guys there. Goodbye.